Hello, my name is Ben Feinstein. I'm a member of Russian Club here at SMU. I'm a sophomore majoring in history and international relations, as well as minoring in the Russian language. In my free time, I am a total history buff, and right behind the camera here, I have a stack of like 15 histories and historical fictions that I want to get through. So it is my absolute pleasure to get the privilege to talk about this Sergei Bondarchuk film. They fought for their country, as well as kick off SMU's International Film Fest. We have screenings running through March 15th from a variety of different cultures and a variety of different languages. The central theme of our film festival this year is this idea of resistance. And it will be very clear through this brief presentation of mine, as well as the film itself, how this film meets that criteria. This week, we have two other screenings, one in Spanish and one in French. So to register for that, go to www.com/ or smu.edu/filmfest. To repeat that, that's smu.edu/filmfest, all one word. You'll find a list of screenings there, as well as a place to register. It's free. Well, it's snowed in outside, and it looks like the Soviet Union in the wintertime outside. It's a great way to spend your time, and I couldn't recommend it more. So now I'm going to launch into this brief presentation on the film that you're about to see. Technology is hard. There we go. So again, this film is called They Fought for Their Country. It's directed by a man named Sergei Bondarchuk. In Russian, it's only Sprazhali za rodinu, and then his name in Russian is obviously Sergei Bondarchuk. So just to briefly structure this discussion, I'm going to be going into the history of the Soviet involvement in World War II to give some background as to why this war was so brutal, just kind of set the stage for this film. Then I'm going to talk about the director himself and why his experiences are really relevant to this compelling story. And then I'm going to talk about the film and launch you in. So the Great Patriotic War is the term for the Soviet Union's involvement in World War II, which spanned from 1941 to 1945. This war was brutal. This is a sensation that we don't necessarily feel in America about World War II. In America, we got attacked at Pearl Harbor, and then all the fighting took place overseas, and we were able to secure a victory at an immense sacrifice of men, of course, but the type of victory that we were able to get didn't come at the cost of our own cities. You didn't see Los Angeles burning or Washington, D.C. bummed to rubble like you did in Europe and especially Russia. And just to give you an idea of how rough this war was on Russia, you can see on the picture to the left, it's a line of infantrymen charging across a bombed out city. And then you can see the buildings in the back are not even habitable anymore. So that city is Stalingrad. That was a massive city on the Volga River, with hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people. And by the end of the battle there, which took place in 1942, it's reduced to nothing. This war was especially bad for a few reasons. One, just for the obvious fact that the war was happening on Russia's turf. All of the fighting is putting Russian civilians in the middle, and Russian people are losing a lot. For another reason, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin had signed a non-aggression pact in 1939, and Adolf Hitler violated that without, telling anyone until the troops were across the border, which meant that the Soviet Union was caught by surprise when the war started. So the Soviet Union's unprepared for this and suffers massively because of it. That suffering is further enhanced because of the nature of the Stalinist dictatorship itself. Joseph Stalin had been paranoid that his officers wanted to launch a coup d'etat against him before the war started. So he gutted his officer corps. He, tried them in mock trials and executed them, meaning that the majority of the Soviet officers, especially the ones they'd been around for a while, they were competent, they knew how to command troops, were dead. Meaning that the officers that were leading the defense of the Soviet Union when Adolf Hitler's, panzers and dive bombers are rolling across the border is the least experienced, most new part of the corps, which makes it even harder to defend. And the final reason why this war is just absolutely terrible for the Soviets is that we can't forget that the Nazi Germans were Nazis. Their ideology believed that the Soviet people, who were primarily Slavic, as well as other ethnic minorities, like Tatars and Uzbeks, they believed that they were inferior races. And the Germans had no qualms about killing civilians, about, executing them and torturing them in the most brutal ways. All of this stress is falling upon the average Russian soldier who's conscripted, who's given a rifle and told to fight, as well as the average Russian farmer, the average Russian city person. They're asked to fight a war that they didn't really ask for. And they carry that sacrifice with a lot of courage and end up driving the Germans back into Germany and defeating them and defeating fascism, along with the help of the Allies, of course. And this isn't to say that communism didn't have its own share of atrocities in the war. It did. But for the average Soviet citizen, this war is cataclysmic, and the struggle to resist the Germans, going back to that theme of resistance, is really, really important. The Soviets lost about 27 million people in this war. The Americans lost, if I'm remembering correctly, about 400,000. So think about how bad that loss is to us and multiply it by, exponentially to understand it for them. And then you'll begin to understand how significant of an event this is. So our director of the movie, Sergei Bondarchuk, actually had a really intimate involvement with the war. Sergei was born on September 25th, 1920, in present-day Ukraine, meaning that when the war started, he was 21 years old, which is prime military age. As soon as he got done with college in 1942, he was conscripted into the Soviet army. He was given a rifle and told to fight, and he did so with valor and distinction. He was decorated for his bravery, and he was discharged from the Soviet army in 1946. But his career wasn't that of a soldier. It was relevant, and we'll see how it's relevant in a second, but his career was acting and directing. That was the passion of his life. He'd been acting since 1937, since before the war even started. He went to college for acting, and he started directing in 1958 with a movie called Destiny of Man. The movie that you've probably heard of that's his biggest success is War and Peace, which is this gargantuan 7-hour movie released in the 1960s. It won the Academy Awards Best Foreign Picture award for that year, actually. He directed this, and he directed a whole slew of other fantastic movies until his death in the 1990s. And key to this movie, he turned his experiences into film. His services as a director, his talent for characters, his talent for storytelling, his talent for showing the average Soviet man won him a lot of accolades internationally and from the government. So the Soviet government awarded him the award, the Hero of Socialist Labor, as well as the People's Artist of the USSR, because he was able to glorify the country so much. So now to discuss the actual film before I set you off. This movie, Oni Sprazili za Rodinu, They Fought for Their Country, was released in 1975. It's based on a novel by an author named Mikhail Sokolov, written, earlier, obviously. The intimate setting of this movie is a platoon, so about, 40 guys of Soviet soldiers in 1942. By this time, the Soviets have stopped the Germans barely from taking Moscow and held the country together, but that doesn't mean they're out of the woods yet. The Germans are deep in Soviet territory. Their columns of infantry of tanks have advanced hundreds of miles into the Soviet countryside, to the point where now they're in the farmlands in southern Russia, which are very, very distant from the plains of Poland where the Germans started the invasion from. So these Soviet soldiers are in southern Russia defending against the Germans near the Don River. And the entire movie, this isn't a spoiler, but they're retreating. They're falling back. They're getting hit hard. And this is where Bondarchuk's experiences really come in. Bondarchuk fought, he understood what it went like, and he went through this himself, and it feels very intimate and accurate. Obviously, I'm not a Soviet soldier, and I can't attest to that, but from what I know about military history, and especially the history of this conflict, this seems dead on. So a few very key elements that you should kind of pick up on. I want to leave some to you as well, though. You'll notice a lot of the actors that were chosen for this movie are older men in the draft. So these actors are older. That's not a coincidence. These are older guys who were put in service and given a rifle and told to fight when the young men had died. So the army is not at its prime anymore because it has taken beating after beating after beating over the past year. Another big theme that you'll pick up on is poor logistics. A lot of plot points and a lot of drama in this movie revolves around a lack of food, a lack of water, having to march miles and miles on foot because of a lack of, horsebound or motorbound transport. The Soviet army struggled with this a lot during the early years of the war. They're fighting this cataclysmic conflict that they weren't prepared for, and they have to equip millions and millions of people just to hold the line. And it shows. And another, very traumatic thing this film gets across is this policy of scorched earth. So not only is the war brutal for all the reasons I mentioned before, but the Soviet troops are retreating the entire time. And every step they retreat, the policy is to burn the land that they retreated from so that the Germans can't use it as food. And this slows down the invader. It's helpful for the ultimate defense of the country, but it's the people's countrysides that are getting burned. It's not good for anyone. It's a necessity. So this film captures a lot of different aspects of the war in this beautiful, 2.5 hour span. Again, it shows a lot of men who don't necessarily want to be there, who are doing this because they have to, who are doing this because their backs are against the wall. And if they fall back or if they fail, it's the people, that suffer. It shows the peasantry that are doing their best to support the troops, but they're also frustrated at how the war is going. It shows the government not necessarily having the best leadership, and it gets across a sense of patriotism that, the Russians highly value, and they have a right to for the sacrifices they suffered in this war. So all of that being said, thank you so much for listening to me. This was a real pleasure to talk about. I hope you enjoy the film. I believe a link is being shared with you or should be shared with you through the film festival. If not, you can find this film on YouTube. Just look it up. Be sure to look out for the director in the movie, actually. I forgot to mention that earlier, but he is one of the feature actors in the movie, and he's quite good, I may add. So it'll be a pleasure to watch. It was a pleasure for me to introduce it and talk to you all tonight. Stay safe and stay warm. And do свидания.